anthropologist always goes into the field with a question he wants to answer. On this trip, I wanted to find out how people change their way of life to adapt to different mountain environments. Nepal is a good place to study a problem of this kind because in the small space between India and Tibet, there is a tremendous variation in altitude. The people I selected for study belong to the Mugger tribe, whose villages were spread from the lower, warmer hills to some of the highest mountain valleys. We began work in a low village. Here the key factors were numerous hillside springs and a climate warm enough to grow rice. In this lush environment, people could live in the same village all year round and could produce enough to feed themselves and have something left over. A village like this that can grow more than it needs to eat can build a schoolhouse and pay a teacher. A number of villagers can eat rice every day, and some of them are wealthy. In December, we began a search for a higher Mugger village. How would its way of life be different? Besides myself, there was Haim, a Mugger high school teacher. Bihari, on leave from his government post to study anthropology. Krishna, a Mugger hill boy. And my wife, Pat. We knew there were Muggers in the high mountains west of Pokhara, but it wasn't enough to find any high Mugger village. We wanted the kind of village that would provide the greatest contrast to the one we had just left. We had heard there were some Muggers who were transhumant, that lived in one village during the winter and moved to another during the summer. If possible, we wanted to find them. A Swiss surveyor said he had seen people who followed this pattern 10 days' walk to the west, but he didn't know who they were. The Nepalese government official who had been with him said they could have been Muggers. We decided to go and see. Bazaar stops always were interesting because we could see how styles were changing. Here also we could talk with men who had made trading trips into the higher mountains and could try to find out whether the semi-nomads we had heard about were Muggers. In Baglung, we stopped to buy rice. The boys who were with us were used to eating it and would have found the steady mountain diet of cornmeal mush difficult. While here, we stayed at a British missionary clinic, the last outpost of Western medicine in this part of the country. With the help of the local headman, we found porters for the last leg of the trek who would stay with us when the going was difficult. Each man carried about 80 pounds. The headman told the porters he would be dishonored if they ran away. Once you leave the major riverbed trails, you have to work much harder to get where you are going. The days become a series of climbs and descents. Sometimes there are bridges, and sometimes there aren't. When we crossed the final pass, we came down into a high mountain valley full of abandoned huts. The Swiss surveyor had been here during the summer and had seen people living in them. Where were these people now, and who were they? Could they be muggers? While Pat and Bihari stayed in one of the huts to guard the gear, Haim, Krishna, and I left to explore the neighboring valley. By the end of January, 39 days after leaving Pokhara, we found our answer. Along the upper Buji River, there were many mugger villagers, and they moved to the high valley in the summer to graze their livestock. The next problem, a major one for anthropologists, was how to find acceptance in the community where we were strangers. I began by finding a headman and asking him to call a meeting of his villagers. I wanted to find out what we could do in return for their hospitality. These muggers were much more hard-pressed than the ones living at lower altitudes. There were no schools, and we suggested lending Haim as a teacher for a few hours every day in return for their help in our research. The men picked up this idea right away and said we could live and work in the village of Masuri. The next day, school began. Masuri's only living grandfather made a writing board for his grandson. It was hard for Kabi Ram, whose only children of school age had recently died. The headman let us use his goat shed for headquarters. We began by taking a census. It's a good way to get acquainted, and the questions are ones people don't mind discussing with newcomers. We always carried a stick because every house had a fierce dog to protect its livestock from leopards. It was plowing time, and the first plowing was done in circles as a form of magic to symbolize full grain bins. The census was hard to get because these villagers had widely scattered fields, some at the head of the valley and some on top of the mountain. Finding a person at home was often a matter of luck. Picking up other kinds of information also was a matter of luck, and hearing about a baby's first rice-eating ceremony depended on our passing by at the right time. The team was quick to learn what was of interest to me. Bihari had heard about an unusual type of marriage. The notebook is the most common way of keeping records. But the camera is useful also, and living in the courtyard made it easy to photograph the articles of daily use. Pictures make a vivid record of gestures of respect. The motion picture camera is another important tool, though it can present many complications. Our darkroom was a small changing bag in the loft of the goat shed, and once the only oil we had for frozen gears was buffalo butter. In the beginning, one of the easier activities to film and observe was a fishing party for a number of villages in the upper valley. It was one of the rare occasions where these people got together for recreation. To get fish, a stream is diverted, leaving them stranded in shallow pools. As soon as the diversion is complete, everyone jumps into the water and begins to hunt for fish. An anthropologist has to have a research design, or he'll collect all kinds of irrelevant material. But whenever he can, he has to be ready to investigate the unexpected and unusual, because it may contribute to what he wants to know. The sound of the drum brought us to a shaman who had been led to this spot by a magic cane. His two assistants were using their wooden swords to transfer a patient's illness to a chicken under the basket. The chicken was to be killed here as a scapegoat and would carry off the evil. As it happened, this information wasn't too important to my research design, but it was interesting, and I never saw this kind of treatment again. It is always important to have the blessing of any officials in the area. When a representative of the king came to visit the valley, we wanted to go and meet him. This event required a variety of preparations. In order to get into a new pair of shoes we gave him, Krishna had to take off some of his feet. The official was being greeted far down the valley at a building that had been built as a school but remained empty because there was no teacher. During his long walking tour, the official visits many villages, settling litigation and telling the people about new plans the government has for developing the country. He is introduced by an ex-soldier who learned to read and write in the Army. As the time progressed, we were happy to add new pupils to our school, including the headman's daughter. School was enlivened by a Bougie Valley version of deck tennis, the first team game these children had ever played. While we were playing, one member of the community took notes. Every day after lunch, a strange daily ritual occurred. Krishna, now sophisticated in the ways of anthropological investigation, called attention to deviant behavior. In this culture, it is customary to honor teachers with a gift. Chicken was welcome any time, but Bihari told the boy the help his family had given us was gift enough. The things that marks an toward acceptance by the community is being asked to participate in family functions. Haim and I joined the marriage party of a village groom and were able to make a tape recording of the music. The musicians were members of the Taylor cast, and the dancers were male members of the wedding party. The groom's father was an ex-Gurkha soldier who had lost his leg in Italy fighting for the British. His pension made him one of the wealthiest men in the valley. When we were reasonably sure we could do some good, we joined community patterns of mutual help by sharing our medicine. And we had to be ready to accept attempts to reciprocate, though Pat did beg off from the complete treatment which would have included lashing her sprained knee with nettles. One of the best ways to learn about a religious ceremony is by participating in it step by step, as if one were a member of the family. We felt we had been as fully accepted as outsiders could be when we were asked by the muggers to participate with them in their worship of the village goddess. Each household brought its share, a chicken, turmeric, cloth, cedar incense, and rice. The rice had to be imported from another valley. The goddess was represented by stones tied with string. Most of the blood from the sacrificed chickens was saved for eating. To honor the goddess, feathers from each chicken were placed beside the stones or tied to the tree. The chicken's toes were left as additional souvenirs. The chickens were plucked and singed at the place of sacrifice. Examining the liver was a means of foretelling the future, a custom going back to ancient Babylon. As a symbol of participation and hope for good fortune, the headman gave everyone a tikka of chicken blood and rice. Then we all returned home to cook our chicken and have a feast. When we had gathered materials for a comparison between this village and the first one, the tent had to come down and we had to leave for home. We left with the hope that the mugger's contribution to us would also become a contribution to man's knowledge of himself.